Hello, listeners. Kathy Lawless, Life Story Curator, bringing you the podcast series, How Did I Get Here? A series of interviews designed for people just starting out in their careers, people in transition, or possibly feeling stuck, and giving them access to the stories of people who have been there, done that, so that they might be inspired with some new ideas, or maybe just comforted knowing they are not alone, that everybody starts somewhere and everybody goes through times of transition and times when they feel stuck. Today, I'm very excited to be interviewing Porcia Chen Silverberg. Welcome, Porcia.
Thank you so much, Kathy. I'm so excited to be with you.
Well, and I can't wait to find out more about you. I've had a chance to talk with you a little bit, so I can't wait for listeners to find out more about you. And Porcia is the chief reinventor, and she's a creativity officer. So that's just a little teaser into what this interview is going to be about. So before we get into the how did I get here part of being a chief reinventor and creativity officer, Porcia, why don't you tell us about where you grew up, how many kids where are you in the birth order, how many siblings, and how do you think that might have shaped you? How you grew up as a young person, and then how that shaped you as a young adult.
Great question. We all need to know our history in order to own our present, right?
Yeah.
So I was a baby girl. I was the fondly called accident in the family. My brothers were 11 and 9 years older than me, and I was actually made in Taiwan. I was born and raised in Taiwan. And I moved to the US when I was a teenager. So I consider Denver actually my home, but the first part of my life was spent in Taiwan.
Wow.
And
So on
yeah.
one hand, you were kind of the only because of the age difference,
hmm
but because you were the youngest, I'm sure it was pretty obvious that you were the youngest, and so maybe a little different perspective than being an only child.
I agree. So essentially, I had four parents. I had two older brothers who were loving and very protective. And so it's wonderful on one hand, but I think on the other, having been the only girl and being the baby, I feel like I definitely was coddled. However, I really felt the need to prove myself too. So I think that's the birth order, how it may have impacted me. I always felt like I wanted to really strive to prove that I belonged, especially knowing from a very early age on that I was an accident. Even though it was all said in fun and joke, it subconsciously I feel like that really made an impact.
Yeah, yeah,
hmm
interesting. Well, very cool. And plus, you were born in another country and
Yes.
then moved to the United States. So, that's got to be a transition. So, um, what all languages do you speak then?
Oh, I only speak two. I wish I spoke more. I do speak Chinese. I speak Mandarin Chinese and, of course, English. And yeah, I would say the early experience, the immigrant experience, really, truly shaped my life. Um, you remember how fun it was to be a teenager, and imagine being a teenager and not knowing how to speak the language and being the only person of color usually or the only Asian in your school, and just really fumbling through school and through classes and trying to feel accepted, feel like I'm not an outsider. Those were all very, very dramatic experiences. And I'm not alone, right? Every single immigrant goes through some sort of a adjustment, integration, and assimilation eventually, or not. So it's not a unique experience, but I know for me personally, having grown up in Denver, it was definitely not the same experience as it would have been had I grew up in California, where I live now.
Yeah. Well, and it's such an awkward time as a teenager. You
hmm
mentioned, feeling like an outsider. I think you can feel that way
hmm
even if you're not from another country, but then you throw on it another language and you look different and act. Oh my gosh, that must have just
Right.
compounded some of those awkward feelings and maybe
Yes.
even made you grow up faster, huh?
Oh, yes, indeedy. In fact, that's one of the one of my goals nowadays is to remember to have fun because I became a kind of a responsible adult so early, so young in life because I, of course, picked up English much quicker than my parents did. So I became the negotiator for the family, and I did a lot of things that no 13, 14-year-olds were doing. And again, that's not unique to many immigrant children, but yeah, definitely. And there were some fun moments where I had to learn the English language, learn the slangs because I still remember vividly. I was in junior high right after I came here. This boy who I thought was so cute, he actually spoke to me, and I remember my heart pounding. And he asked me, "Hey, do you want to smoke some pot after school today?" And I remember, Kathy. Now this is, I don't know, so many 40 years ago. I remember looking up my little dictionary and found the word pot and knew intuitively he wasn't asking me to smoke that. Right. So there were moments like that that I really can remember and look back on. And, but knowing what I know, having gone through what I have gone through and looking at my career, I think being an immigrant actually really was one of those key, key defining roles or experiences that impacted my career.
Well, yeah, and when I think your title is Chief Reinventor, I mean, you already reinvented yourself at age 13
I did.
for the first time. So, okay, couple more icebreaker questions here. Are you an introvert or an extrovert?
Flaming extrovert.
Flaming extrovert. Okay, so
Yes.
you've been going a little bit crazy, stir crazy during this COVID time, I'm guessing.
Actually, I did all right because I have I've had some family circumstances with my mom, so I've had to do a lot of caretaking. So that brought out the nurturer in most women. And astrologically, if you believe in those sort of things, I am a Cancer, so I do have my quiet side, but I do get recharged by being with people. So it was tough, but shockingly, I made it through fairly unscathed.
Well, I'm glad you made it through.
Still in it though, right,
Well,
Kathy?
yeah, yeah. I guess we're not really out of it, are we?
No,
It just feels like there's hope, I guess,
it
because of
does.
vaccines coming and knowing people who are getting vaccinated and hearing about it. So,
Yes.
a couple other questions on the fun meter on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being couch potato and 5 being the life of the party. Where do you put yourself?
Depending on the day, and I would say if I were at a party, I would definitely be at a 5.
When
Yeah,
you're with
so
people and at parties, yeah.
for my 50th birthday, it was a big birthday and a marker year. So to celebrate it, I actually ended up doing what was it? Bungee jumping twice as a fundraiser for the nonprofit I was a executive director at. So, because once wasn't enough, I did it twice.
Did it twice.
I
Okay, well,
did.
that might answer then my next question, which is on the risk meter on a scale of 1 to 5. Where do you put yourself?
Well, actually, you would think I am a high risk taker, and I am in many incidents, but I take calculated risks. So, we'll call it a 4.
4. Okay, well, when you did the bungee jumping, did you do all kinds of research on their safety
No.
records and
No. I trust that if it's time for me to go, it's time for me to go. Just like I did skydiving with an instructor who barely spoke English. So when he was giving out the safety instructions, I remember thinking, wow, I really hope I'm understanding this correctly.
okay,
So,
you've
yeah.
done bungee jumping and you've done skydiving. I don't think you're a 4. I'm going to put you at a 7.
No, I don't think so. That's it. That's the only fun, adventurous things I've done.
Okay. Well, I love those questions because they really, as we start learning more about your story, it starts to play out and we get a better sense of who you are and what drives you. So tell us a little bit about being a chief reinventor and creativity officer, and then we'll dive into how did I get here?
Okay. So I realized in talking with you previously, actually, that I really take pride now, now that I'm older and wiser, in the title of Chief Reinventor, because looking back at my career when I was a starting emerging leader and just starting out in my career, it wasn't so fashionable to change jobs all the time. And you will remember, right? It,
Oh
it
yeah.
wasn't truly valued to be able to jump from job to job like today. Nowadays, it's unusual for someone to stay in a job more than 2 years, and it's highly valued and encouraged in
Yeah.
many incidents, right? So for me, when I look back, and I actually made a note because I was very curious to know if this is true that I am a master reinventor. And you've talked to a lot of people now, Kathy. So
Mhm.
tell me, have you talked to anyone who has had now professional career after college, who's had 22 jobs in 17 industries, including starting my own business 4 times, including starting my own nonprofits twice. That's my record.
Okay, well, and you win. You win because while I've got some what I would call some pretty master reinventors in terms of I know one woman who she became a police officer and then
Uh-huh,
she got into corporate security and now
uh-huh.
she is a love coach.
Love it.
So that's a very big change, but
That
it's not
is.
22 and 17 different industries. But yeah, so there's some really big reinvention stories out there. But yeah, I think you can now. I think you're highly qualified as the chief reinventor and creativity officer.
I think so, yes. And if, truthfully, I think every single immigrant who has made it in this country or still making it, just by being an immigrant, we are reinventors, right? Because when we come to a new country, we really had to reinvent our identity, adopt a new culture, new everything, new language. And so, definitely, I think this reinvention has been a theme in my life. I just actually wasn't so conscious of it until recently.
Well, that's great that now you have this aha because I think when we figure out that gift or that strength
Yes.
or that theme and can claim it,
Yes,
you become more powerful and
absolutely.
things just move faster and fall into place. So well,
Absolutely.
congratulations on your aha. I'm sitting here
Thank
wondering,
you.
do we have enough time to get through 20 22 22 different roles in 17 industries? Um, so let me ask this: when you were a young person, say junior high, high school, and obviously this is when you were reinventing yourself, what did you want to be when you grew up? I mean, when you moved to the United States, did you see that as an opportunity? Oh, I can be anything I want to be, or was it no, I probably should be this because of maybe family dynamics or something you were interested in?
And that's such a good question, Kathy. And if I think about it, I would say my very first job, I didn't include it in my 22 jobs because this was before I became a professional. But the first time I was paid for my time and talents was when I was, I think I was 7, 6, 5, I don't know, somewhere in there, probably 6. So I was a child, quote unquote, actress in Taiwan. It wasn't anything significant. I was the daughter, or no, sister of the female lead, a big star, but that's it. But that was the first time I received payment. So I suppose when I was a little girl, I wanted to grow up to be an actress. But when I came to the US and when I started my career and doing so many part time jobs, when I was in high school, at one point, when I recount back to my history, I was going to high school. I think I was a junior in high school, and I was working 4 part-time jobs. So those aren't included in my
Wow.
22 jobs either. Yeah, I was working 4 jobs and going to school. I have no idea why. Like, I seriously think back and say, what was I thinking? So, I've always been so passionate about working, I guess. And I didn't know what I wanted to grow up to be, but I knew I could not be in a traditional job. So therein lie a problem for not problem, but yeah, somewhat of a problem challenge with my family because as you know, many older cultures and especially Asians, they value the traditionally accepted and acceptable and successful professions are considered, your doctors, lawyers, accountants, engineers, and the very proven paths, career paths. And for me, I could never see myself doing any of those things. And I remember one of the fun, fun family challenge over the years was my parents could never understand what I was doing. They couldn't understand what I did. So when they would tell their friends, they couldn't explain. She's in sales, she's in marketing. Finally, one day I worked for PBS. I worked for Channel 6, Rocky Mountain PBS for a few years. So that was the one period in my life when my parents could very clearly, unequivocally tell their friends what I did for a living.
The first time.
Yeah. Yes.
So what did you go on to college after high school, or how did you start
Did.
your career then?
No, I went to CU Boulder, and I didn't know any better anyway, but it turned out to be a wonderful experience. Yep, went to CU Boulder, as many of my friends did, in
Oh,
communication. That was my major.
your majors, okay.
Yes,
And
I
then from
loved it.
oh,
Loved it.
and did you find that that was a good niche then, and kind of it opened some doors for you? And
It did. Yeah, I loved the major because initially when I went to school, of course, I was a young person, so I thought, oh, of course, I'm going to major in business. That's what I should do. And I actually became a peer counselor at the business school for 1 year. So I became very familiar with all the curriculums and what one has to take in order to graduate. And
ah,
that was the year when I realized, oh no, this is so clearly not for me. I took an accounting class and I was so stressed out after my final, the first final. I literally got sick from the time I walked home from the class. Ooh, after I took the final, by the time I got back to my dorm room, which is across the street, I had a fever and I was sick for 2 days.
oh my gosh.
Yes, I
Well,
know.
pay attention to your body when it sends you signals like that.
Yes. It was quite clear. No, we're not doing this.
Oh, okay. So then communications, totally opposite feeling, I'm guessing, when you took those
Yes,
classes, and yeah, no sickness
exactly.
and probably
Nope.
energy.
Yes, loved my classes, enjoyed going to classes, and felt that I could use it all in my everyday life. So, yes, good clue.
Oh, awesome. So give us a little bit of rundown on the path. I don't know if we can get to all 22, but how did things transpire for you then? Did you have an internship to get that first role, or sounds like you were always working and doing something, so you got a lot
Yes.
maybe connections.
Well, so interestingly, my very first job out of college did come from a part-time job. It was a paid position, so it wasn't actually an internship. But at CU Boulder, there was, and I believe is still there, a wonderful program called Program Council, which they did all the concerts that happened on campus, and they used to do movie series, and I mean just all the entertainment events, activities were put on and coordinated by this department, Program Council. And it was a collaboration between this department and back then, the concert promoter was Faye
Oh, wait.
Concerts,
Oh, that's a
right?
name from the past. Oh,
Oh, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So Program Council had a very active partnership with Faye Concerts and other promoters. So they hired me as a director of PR for one summer, and I ended up staying on that job my senior year. So, because of that experience and connection, I was offered a job to be the PR director for Faye Concerts as my first job out of college.
Oh,
So,
wow.
yeah,
So,
yeah, it was
so
very interesting to be, working at Red Rocks. And during the day, I would work in my office, and at night, I would go to concerts and or the arena back then. So yeah, it was a really fun, unusual first job, which led me to the next one. And I won't go into all my jobs, but the first two were kind of interesting. The second job lasted just a few months because I decided to get married and move to New York. But my second job was working for the symphony. So I went from rock and roll to the
Ah,
symphony.
yeah. Well, it's interesting to me. You said that you worked for the department name was called Program Council,
Yes,
which sounds like such a boring name for such a fun job. I mean,
I know.
what a great job. I mean, but I would never even think about it if that was what I saw on a bulletin board somewhere. I'd be like, well, what's that? I don't want to do program
Exactly.
council. But if it had said, come plan this event or rock and roll. But anyway, I'm sorry, I digress. So yeah, so two very very interesting jobs for you. And was music like a big part of you,
Nope.
or was it just
Nope.
the
No, the
communication?
first concert I was hired to promote while I was at CU with the program council was back then they had concerts called the Sunday concerts.
Oh,
So they bring in like five, four or five different groups. And I remember Van Halen was the big headliner. And, I knew their music a little bit, but honestly, I did not know most of the music. I
yeah.
was in charge of promoting later on. So yeah. So which goes to
I attended a couple of those Sundays. I remember the
did
one in
you?
particular I went to had George Thorogood, Hart,
Oh,
and the Rolling Stones, and it was an
wow.
awesome concert up at Folsom Field. And
Yep, yep. So
wow,
that was probably
that's probably you.
co-sponsored or put on by program council
Yeah.
as if it was Folsom Field. Yeah. Crazy, huh?
Wow. Wow. Okay, so you get married and move to New York, or
Yep.
did you get married after you moved to New York? I'm not. Anyway,
No,
go
we got
go.
married and moved to New York. Well, my husband was already there, so we decided that we didn't want to wait for me to move there later. So we had a long distance relationship for 6 months, and then we got married, and I moved to New York to be with him, and loved it, loved every minute of it.
Well, and you're young, so you're thinking, again, career, I can just start over, find something there. Were you thinking you wanted to stay
Yep.
in kind of the concert promotion space, or were
No, it never occurred to me, actually, now that you say that. It never occurred to me, but I did get a job working for a company that I had interviewed a job for in Denver, which I didn't get because they said that I was overqualified, but we stayed in touch. Another good point for people, right? Because I didn't get the position, but I stayed in touch with the interviewer. And when I found out I was moving to New York, I told her, and that's what this company's headquarter was. So she said, "Oh, you should call our New York office," and that's where I got my first job in New York.
wow, that is a great lesson. Thank you for sharing that,
You're
because
so welcome.
sometimes you feel like when you don't get the job, you feel like, well, that door is closed, right? And I'm done.
Right,
And
right.
they wouldn't want anything to do with me, but obviously she liked you, thought you were, gave you that feedback. So,
Yes,
and then you could be useful somewhere else. So, wow, great
absolutely.
lesson. Great
It
lesson.
is. And I always know, even when I was younger, I think that if I didn't get a job, it was just the wrong fit, right? It wasn't necessarily personal, and I knew something better was around the corner. So I think
Oh,
that is one of my qualities. I think that's really helped me with my career and my success that I've had is to be relentlessly positive and optimistic.
yeah. Well, if you carry that and that's your being, that's what you're putting out in the universe and your energy. So obviously, good stuff's going to be attracted to you when you're the opposite of that,
Absolutely.
right? Bad
Yes.
stuff's going to be attracted to you. So, what a great perspective to have. Did you did you realize it at the time? It sounds like you did, that you kind of just knew, well, that's not for me, and or
Yeah,
when you
I
look back.
think I took it harder when I was younger, but I
Mhm.
definitely knew in my heart of heart that something better was around the corner. I think having overcome so much since a young age, I actually was pretty sure of myself. I knew my confidence was probably pretty high because having done so much and having already proven that I could do it if I just put my mind to it. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So at early 20s, how many, you probably already had six jobs that you haven't
Oh
listed
yeah.
at 22. So yeah, of course you had confidence and you had experience, and
Right. And it's funny. I think there's this mentality. I'm not sure it's necessarily a good thing or something I would advise to a younger person, but I know for me, all of my life in the back of my mind, I could hear this phrase, suck it up, buttercup. Just suck it up and keep going.
That is a good phrase. And, it's funny, some of the other interviews, what that reminded me of is in other interviews, people talk about, you got to do the work. And,
Right.
even though from the outside, people look in and they look at what people, have achieved. And sometimes you don't recognize all the work that they have done, what they have
Hmm.
overcome, and all the areas
Hmm.
where they sucked it up,
Yeah.
buttercup, and
Right.
made the best of it. You just see that, oh, they got to this great spot. And so obviously, but that's what I love about this podcast is that we get to
Hmm.
hear that backstory, and we get to hear, so while you were this very positive and person, you still had that mindset. Sometimes you had to remind yourself that to suck it up.
Absolutely. And I would say being a positive person, it does have its shadow, right? We all have our light and shadow. And the shadow is because I was so busy sucking it up, I never took the time to reflect deeply enough to acknowledge the pain and trauma and what I had to go through. So we just kind of, and I know there are lots of women and or people like me, we just push through everything and we don't stop or pause long enough to really heal from past traumas before we move on. And eventually all those negative experiences that we have pushed underneath and that we just really powered through, eventually they will resurface, right? And eventually we all do need to honor that, acknowledge what happened, and heal so we can truly move on to that next level of greatness and true success. And I call it the wholehearted success. Like Brene Brown, I just love her. But I really feel that a lot of successful people, especially successful women, and I know you've talked to so many times we're just so busy powering through all the obstacles and striving, 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 going to the next level, next level, next level. It's rare that we stop long enough to not only acknowledge where we are, to look back on how far we've come. I know for me, there were times that I just did not stop long enough to really celebrate my success along the way, right? Whenever I cross the barrier or accomplish a new thing, it's kind of like, okay, check, move on, next, next, next. And eventually it's going to catch up to us.
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting you say that, because when I think about many of the interviews I've done, there has been a health scare or a health,
Mm.
um, I don't even know, I guess I would say trauma, or maybe
Mm-hmm.
a health message,
Mm-hmm.
where the person has said, and then I had to stop that, that push through.
Mm-hmm.
And my normal tendency was, that I realized that I was driving too hard or doing too
Right.
much, and my body let me know. And
Exactly.
but it took a while. Like one in particular, I remember her saying she didn't realize it was a pattern and that she was creating the pattern.
Mm-hmm.
She just thought it was an event. So it started in college, and then
Mm-hmm.
it happened again when she was in like her second or third job, and then it
Mm-hmm.
happened again when she, like 5 or 6 years later. And each time I think it got increasingly worse. And then
Exactly.
it reached a point where she had to really, it was very serious. And
Right.
she looked at it and went, "Oh, wait a minute! This is a pattern, and this is something I'm doing with my self care and my health and my well being that I can control." So
You're
very,
absolutely right, Kathy. And that's why when you said earlier, our bodies would tell us, right? We just oftentimes don't listen. And for me, I call those events or health issues that come up, I call those the cosmic 4x4, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
I really try not to be hit in the head by a cosmic 4x4. And I am a very spiritual person, as you and I had talked last time. So a big part of my being of who I am is to journal and do reflection and really constantly making room in my life for those reflection moments so I don't want to be caught off guard, right? And not to say it doesn't happen to me, because it happens plenty, but I do my best to prevent it from becoming a huge cosmic 4x4. So there are definitely bumps along the way, and I have learned to listen to these messages for sure.
So when you've been talking about this, that you weren't as reflective as you are now, was there a point in your life, kind of a pivotal event where you reached it and you went, oh, I really need to kind of change my standard, method of operation here? Or was it more gradual for you? Was it something that you've just kind of evolved into?
That's such a good question. I'm not sure, but I think what comes to mind as you were asking the question is there was definitely one pivotal moment that made me realize things had to change. And there were probably others. I just can't think of it right now. But when I was in Denver before I moved to California, this is, oh gosh, 14 years ago in August. So back then, I had started an organization called the National Center for Community Relations, NCCR. And I started it when I was still working full time at Channel 6, and that was on the side, and it became my full time passion. And I realized that I cared so much about that organization. And that organization was a coalition of people from all different sectors. We come together, and I said we were networking for good. So just looking to create opportunities for people to connect. And anyway, I cared so much about that enterprise that I used to joke that that became my baby, even though I have two children of my own, but that was my baby. And I felt like I was dreaming about NCCR. I was constantly thinking about it, dreaming about it. And I said I was making love to it. It was all consuming. That's all I thought about.
Mhm.
So I know that I totally got so burned out toward the end. I took some time off and took a leave of absence from the board, and still it was just so much on my soul. I just couldn't get away from it. And when we came to California, I jokingly said I had to move out of state in order to have some life balance. I mean, that's not why we moved, but I feel like, that was partly why. So
Yeah.
definitely, yeah, we could definitely overwork.
Was it your first nonprofit that you started, or your first
Yes,
even entity that you started? I mean, I
yes,
think that's
yes. It
why
was my first nonprofit. Yes.
such an attachment to it, because it was just so much a part of you at the time. And
Yes, it was my passion. It was my heart project, and it's still a part of me. And what I realize now is it's always been a part of me to create an environment, create a space where people from all walk of life can come together and feel welcomed and feel acknowledged and witnessed and feel seen, heard, and belong. That's always been and still is my passion.
wow, well, and you can hear your energy when you talk about it. And your
Mm.
passion, it just comes out. So I can see why you were so connected to that. When I think about your immigrating, and if you'd had something like that when you moved here, that
Right.
would have probably been, a real life changer for you, right? Very different
Yeah,
experience than what you
absolutely.
had. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's funny. My other passion is nonprofits, and very few immigrants actually discover nonprofits on purpose, because that's just not something we knew about. And the nonprofit industry in this country is second next to none in the world. There's no other nonprofit sector in the world like we do in the U.S. So it's a phenomenal industry and very, very misunderstood. So I remember when I had NCCR, they were often nonprofit executive directors or just professionals would tell me, I've never been to a networking event where I feel like I'm equal to everybody else. It just, because so often we go to those chamber events or any of those traditional business networking events where people just, the moment they hear you're a nonprofit person, they start looking around the other room, around the room to find somebody else to talk to, right? So I just think nonprofit professionals are some of the true unsung heroes in this country. And so often they don't get the recognition they deserve and are not properly thanked and recognized.
Yeah. And they fill such a great part of our society and
Oh,
our needs in the world in so many ways.
oh
Uh,
my gosh,
yeah, in
yes,
so many
yes.
ways. I, um, I guess I hadn't realized that that was such a phenomena in the United States. I had heard that Colorado has one of the highest rates of, or the highest numbers of nonprofits in the state, and that it's, they just, a lot of them start in Colorado, and I'm not sure what the driving force is behind that, but
It's true. Colorado does have one of the highest, but it's just phenomenal. And I think the nonprofit industry to me is actually one of the indicators of why United States is such an amazing country. And we won't go into politics. And I still believe we are a great country already. And partly because you look at how many Americans, whether they were born here or foreign born, who are dedicating their lives and their energy in the nonprofit industry, whether or not they're professionals or volunteers, the sheer number of people, the sheer number of donors, the sheer number of people who care for something so much bigger than themselves to get involved in a nonprofit. That right there is our culture in this country. It is a spirit of generosity. And that's what we got to preserve and continue to nurture.
yeah. Well, again, you're putting that positive energy out into the world, and you're going to be attracting that.
Yes, I agree.
Wow. Very. So, there's so many places I want to go next. Where do you go then? So you started this nonprofit, and then it sounds like you transitioned it to another leader. You moved to California. So,
Mhm.
what were some of the other? I mean, you talk about being in 17 different industries. What were some of your other, I guess, pivots or transition points that were really meaningful for you?
Well, I would say that early part of my career, those first, I don't know, 10 jobs or more, I was always doing sales or marketing and or PR, a lot of sales. I think I've done advertising sales. So they were fine, and I met a lot of great people. There were interesting experiences, but I realized that what the true pivot was when I started working for Channel 6, Rocky Mountain PBS.
Ah,
When I worked for Channel 6 was when I realized this whole world of nonprofits, because I really didn't know anything about nonprofits before, even though the symphony was a nonprofit, but you don't think of it as a nonprofit. It's a musical,
yeah, you think of it as
institution.
a symphony. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a symphony. You don't think of it as it's a nonprofit. So when I worked at Channel 6, my first job, so I had three different positions while I was working for Channel 6 in the 5 years. So, even though, so yeah, I actually didn't count those jobs as separate
Oh,
jobs.
geez, let's go more. Keep finding more.
I know, I actually have more. So it was hard for me to stay in one position for a long time, clearly, because, something else come along and I didn't hesitate to grab a new opportunity. Anyway, I was doing corporate development, which means I was always finding underwriters to underwrite the awesome programs on Channel 6. And in doing so, I started doing a lot of networking and I went out to a lot of events because obviously networking was good for sales and business development. But that's when I discovered this whole world of nonprofits. I mean, I really didn't know there was such an industry, even though Channel 6 was a nonprofit too. So
Mhm.
I met all these extraordinary people doing extraordinary things for their community and meeting all these needs and creating services for people who needed them. So it was such an eye opener. So when I started seeing that and when I started surrounding myself with people who worked in or volunteered for nonprofits, I realized that was when I realized that I found my people. So
Ah,
it's not that I don't appreciate business people because I
mhm.
certainly do, and some of them are some of the best volunteers or board members. I just know that for me, it is super important in order for me to have a successful, happy, fulfilling, wholehearted life, I need to have a purpose that's bigger than myself. So when I find a whole tribe of people who feel the same way, that's when my whole career shifted, and it changed my life. And the other thing I'll put in the, it's not even a plug because they're not around anymore, but my career completely transformed and went to the next level when I started volunteering for nonprofits and sitting on boards and being on committees of chambers. And this is super important, being a part of leadership cohort. So back then it was the DCLF, Denver Community Leadership Forum. It was a program out of CU Denver. And it was a program where they brought in 10 people, 10 leaders from nonprofit, 10 leaders from business, 10 leaders from government. And it was a year-long program. There was an outward bound component to it. And I tell you, Kathy, that leadership experience just changed me, changed my life. And from that moment on, I became kind of a junkie for leadership development or passion, no junkie.
Yeah, yeah. I love. I had someone tell me that once too. That I was a. He said I was a growth junkie, and about same
Yeah.
thing about learning and growing
Yes.
and development. And I thought, I know he's. This is a compliment, but the word junkie really, that's starting to make me feel like maybe I am addicted, and maybe it, is there a negative side of this? So I like the term aficionado or
Mm-hmm.
enthusiast.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I had another term, now I can't remember it, but wow. So very pivotal moments for you in terms of
Yes.
not only kind of the industry or the area of focus you wanted to be, but also stepping into being more of the decision maker and the leadership and finding out how things ran and how you could contribute at that level too.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, yeah, that's definitely a pivotal moment. And in fact, because I was so enthusiastic about leadership development, I ended up, and this is recently, I realized that I've been a part of 10 leadership cohorts in my career.
Wow.
So clearly, I'm passionate about them. And in fact, that's what I'm about to launch in this next year. I'm in the process of creating a brand new cohort, leadership cohort for women and bringing immigrant women together with American born women professionals. And it's going to have all the great ingredients of leadership cohorts that I've participated in over the years, but it will also have some other components that will provide deeper reflection and discovering our inner wisdom and opportunities for healing, and also a space for women to witness one another. So I'm very excited.
Wow, sounds very intriguing and interesting, and again, creating a community like you did that
Yes,
first nonprofit, right? That
yes,
community where you can come together and with a common purpose and a mission then on where you're going to go next and serving one another, it sounds like, but then also
yes.
what else can you be serving? Wow.
Absolutely. In fact, I think what's different about this one is that the theme, I would say, the focus is really uncovering our immigrant stories. So even you, Kathy, even though you weren't an immigrant,
Mhm.
not first generation immigrant, I bet somewhere in your life you have an immigrant story. Maybe it's from a grandparent or aunt or best friend or neighbor. Everyone has an immigrant story. And for some, it really has helped to shape who they are. So I talked to a woman recently. Her parents were immigrants. She was born and raised in California. And she said, Portia, until we've had this conversation, I never realized how much the way I think about money, the way I think about education, the way I think about family, everything I do, it's all driven from a perspective of an immigrant.
Oh, because that's what she grew up with. Were
That's what she grew
immigrants.
up
Yeah.
with.
Wow.
Yes. And I've talked to people whose grandparents were immigrants, and yet some of their core beliefs and philosophies are very much influenced by the grandparents. So I think it's important, as we said earlier in our conversation, it really is important to know our roots and our own story, whether it's this generation or previous. And I think it's really important to have the full picture if we want to live a wholehearted and true, authentic, successful life. Now,
Yeah. Well, if not, we're just kind of on autopilot, right?
exactly.
And I do
Exactly.
think this crazy pandemic is really you had to turn off the autopilot, right? We
Yes.
all have to do things so differently now. Um, One of the interviews I just published this week, she talked about that, this is a really, she didn't want to sound like she was saying the pandemic was brilliant, but she was saying this is a brilliant opportunity to really be intentional about what and who we let back into our lives. Because we really had to
Absolutely.
kind of compartmentalize and stay home and be isolated. And so now what are we going to let back in? And so it sounds like
Yes.
that's what you're saying too, is
Yes.
how do you look at, well, what was I doing and why? And then now where do I want to go and why? Probably. So
Absolutely. And going forward, we know the quality of life very much is determined by the people we hang out with
Mhm.
and how we, what we occupy our brain with, right? What are we thinking about? And as you alluded to earlier, the more we think about something, the more we attract it, right? And wasn't it Nightingale who said, like we become what we think about? Or, I mean, there are lots of different quotes, right? Oh, in fact, I have a good one from Oprah who said, let's see. I'm actually, I know people on a podcast can't see, but I'm looking at my book that I co-authored a couple of years ago, and we have all these brilliant quotes in it. And they're just, I don't know about you, but I love quotes. And this one is by Oprah. She said, "Here's what my love affair with quotations has taught me. The more you focus on words that uplift you, the more you embody the ideas contained in those words." Isn't that
Ah,
so great?
yeah.
Yeah. So, yes, like you said, the pandemic has brought us an opportunity to be more intentional about our life. And I think that really is the silver lining from what happened.
Yeah. You just mentioned, you just drop in there, I co-authored a book. Uh, was that one of your 22 roles?
uh,
You're an author or a writer?
I I guess did I count that? Well, it's one of my 22, yeah, my one of my business.
Oh my
Yeah,
God.
so you're right. There's more. We don't have time for that. But yeah, in the last few years, since I left the nonprofit I was at ED for 9 years in California, I actually started a TV show which had to stop during the pandemic. I also co-authored a book. In the TV show, I actually interviewed 32 women from 21 countries, and I produced 17 episodes. So,
Wow. And tell us what the content and the topic was of all your interviews. And
so I interviewed all these successful immigrant women professionals from around the world, and I wanted to bring positive stories of immigrants to the world. And
yeah.
one of the women I interviewed, one of the most recent women I interviewed, just became the acting administrator and senior official of the federal FTA, Federal Transportation Authority, I think.
Wow.
So yeah, so it's just, I think we are surrounded by amazing, awesome, everyday heroes and sheroes, but we just oftentimes don't hear about their stories. Just
No.
like you, Kathy. I'm just like you. I love stories.
Yes. Yes. And you're bringing them about, and you're bringing about from an immigrant perspective, which is really
Yes,
cool to see. And I think that the challenges faced there are just so different. And with the language and the culture and and then obviously there's got to be a discrimination factor too that goes with it in terms of and a lack of advantage. There's so many
hmm
advantages to, as we're learning through all of this, right? Learning about how we look and talk and education, all these things, right? There's so many advantages, and sometimes you can be written off just by the way you look. And
absolutely.
And so I
Absolutely.
love that you're bringing stories about and helping helping share those stories. That's so cool. But Portia, I can't believe it already. We've got to be wrapping up. We could keep talking all afternoon. So I,
Sure.
I do like to wrap up with a couple questions. And so the first is, when you look back on your career, what do you think has served you best? And it can be like maybe a strength or a personality trait or maybe a discipline.
I would say that when I lived in Denver, I had a nickname that I was the Yenta of Joy. So being joyful and being a flaming optimist definitely helped with my career, with my life. So I think being resilient, having passion, um, and having some grit, right? And being able to connect the dots. I think all these qualities have really helped shape my career.
Yeah. Well, I love that, because you mentioned earlier about that, being a positive person does have some shadows to it. And I
Yes,
think sometimes people think of positive people as not having grit and they don't get things done. They're just positive and always happy. And,
right.
they kind of roll along with things. But it sounds like you maintain that positiveness no matter what's going on. And you power through and you grit through and you make things happen. So very cool. Now, so what does the word yenta mean then?
Yenta means a matchmaker.
A matchmaker. Oh, very
Yes.
cool.
So I love connecting people to opportunities to feel good and to live a happily ever after life right now, today. Don't
Yeah.
wait till later.
Don't, yeah. Cause sometimes we think, well, I'll work hard now and then later I'll
That's
be
right.
happily ever after. It's like, no, be
That's
happy
right.
now. And what you're doing.
Exactly. Every day we have opportunities to do so.
Yeah. Well, and you already shared one quote from Oprah, but any other words of wisdom that
Oh,
you found were really kind of meaningful for you at a certain point in your career?
well, I do love this one quote. So again, the book that I co-authored is called Gatherings for Greatness. So it's all about, my co-author is also a fellow Pollyanna. We love Pollyanna. And I think Pollyannas are actually very powerful, not just Pollyanna. But anyway, here's one quote that I love. It's by Wilma Mankiller. And the quote goes, "The most fulfilled people are those who get up every morning and stand for something larger than themselves."
Ah, that is so true. The most fulfilled. It's about others, not
That's
about
right.
self. Wow.
That's right.
Wow. Very cool. Well, Portia, this has been so cool. I got to tell you also, you mentioned you're a Cancer. I'm a Cancer.
Ah!
We need to chat more. I remember when we first met. I think our conversation was scheduled for 30 minutes, and we went for about an hour and a half, if I remember. So it's been a pleasure to get to know you. Thank you today for sharing your story. I do need to wrap up for our listeners because I like to keep these interviews at
Yep.
a certain length. But I think maybe a year from now, I need to get you back on the schedule and say, well, how did I get here now? And the number from 22 will probably jump up to like 24, 27, I'm thinking, so in just 1 year's time. So
Well, I thank you for the opportunity to share my story. And it's very indulgent for me to be talking about me, the entire hour because I'm used to hearing other people's stories. So thank you for this opportunity. And you are brilliant at time control because you're spot on. So I thank you. And we're going to wrap up. And until next time, to be continued.
awesome. Well, thank you so much. Listeners, if you enjoyed today's interview, please subscribe below and you'll be alerted for other interviews as they're published. If you have any questions for me or for Portia, you can post those on my website, lifestorycurator.com, which is where I post all of these interviews. And then I'll also post information about Portia's business too, and how you can get in touch with her should you have any other questions for her or want to reach out. So on that note, I would just say stay safe, stay well, and let's keep sharing those stories. Thank you.
Yay!